Imagine opening your eyes and realizing that Britain's immortal hero is not a legend in dusty parchment, but a flesh and blood prince named Owain Ddantgwyn. What if Camelot was not a castle in a fairy tale, but the result of guerrilla tactics and secret pacts forged in the dark? Imagine a sword embedded in a sandstone sarcophagus, its edge exposed to the elements, guarding secrets of nocturnal ambushes and alliances between Druids and Christians. In a few minutes, you will understand how this vulnerable man, subject to betrayal, doubt, and family conflict, brought together fragmented peoples under one banner. There are no immaculate kings on the throne here. There is a leader who transformed chaos into unity, and whose strategies resonate with the challenges, leadership, and courage we face today. Are you ready to dismantle the myth and piece together the puzzle of a real King Arthur? The name Arthur, reverberating through the misty valleys and ancient forests of Brittany, charged with a magnetism that defies time. To understand where this myth came from, we need to go back to the shadows of the campfires, when bards of Welsh, Pictish, and British dialects sang tales of courage to attentive peasants. On the nights of Beltane, a festival that celebrated the rebirth of light, singers rose up before everything. Young warriors dove into icy lakes, retrieving Druid banners under the expectant gaze of the tribes, proofs of bravery that, centuries later, Morgan Le Fay would immortalize in legends about a mysterious lake. These oral histories formed a cultural melting pot, mixing folklore and guerrilla warfare, as important as the tactics of a Roman general. Think of Cú Chulainn, an Irish hero who disguised himself as an innkeeper to ambush enemies, valuing cunning over brute force. Think of Fionn mac Cumhail, who gathered warriors at Ostermna, a place whose name echoes in the Round Table. It is no coincidence that Arthur later appears in texts as a master of the nocturnal ambush, cutting down Saxon patrols with lightning strikes before dawn. At South Cadbury Hill, archaeology confirms this meeting of myth and history. Thermoluminescence analysis dates the earliest earthworks to the 5th century, and beneath the ground, Atlantic iron sheets lie alongside pottery fragments decorated with basket marks, evidence of ritual feasting. Geoffrey of Monmouth did not invent Mordred's feast or the offerings to the Lady of the Lake out of thin air. He borrowed them from the vivid folklore that has survived among these ruins. And it doesn't stop there. Medieval maps kept in manuscripts at Jesus College, Cambridge, trace an arc of villages. Llanarth, Arthog, Arthuret, all names that come from the Gaelic Artos, meaning bear. Imagine troubadours traveling these 40 clanera villages, carrying news of victory from clearing to clearing. Researchers at the Cardiff University Centre for Advanced Welsh and Celtic Studies show that these same trails coincide with Christian pilgrimage routes, where the profane and the sacred intertwine in the origin of myth. On Mount Athos, Byzantine, monks recorded in the margins of an 11th century Greek-Latin codex the curious notation, Arturius Peregrinus, perhaps a passing Breton merchant. This find suggests that tales of a British leader made their way across the Mediterranean, whispered in monasteries that blended Christian beliefs with echoes of Celtic traditions. At Tintagel, excavations have uncovered jars of aromatic incense and animal teeth votive offerings carbon-14 dated to 530 AD. Close your eyes and see Arthur, or whoever forged his legend, blessing allies at these makeshift altars. They are signs of pacts of fealty, pre-battle rites, woven together by the belief that the land needed to be consecrated to welcome warriors in a trance of hope. And in the heart of the Avon Valley, ogamic inscriptions whisper the names of Analaith, Tumulus Peregrini, grave of the stranger. Hooded visitors arrived, leaving cryptic inscriptions and dissolving into marshes, as if guarding secrets from distant worlds. This silent exchange of mystery and myth suggests that Arthur incorporated not only British traditions but elements of wandering heroes from many cultures. Myths like this don't emerge in a vacuum. They are fueled by crises, tribes fighting for survival, invaders pushing back borders, and leaders needing to prove their power and legitimacy. Arthur was born out of the urgency to unite fragmented peoples, not by decree, but by the allure of shared symbols. Finally, ask the question that echoes throughout medieval manuscripts. Who was the visionary who took these campfire tales and turned them into romances of chivalry? It was the fusion of oral traditions, the literary visions of Geoffrey and Chrétien, archaeological discoveries, and folk beliefs that shaped King Arthur as an eternal symbol of hope and unity. There is a disconcerting silence in the earliest sources about King Arthur. A silence that disturbs, that provokes, that seems to whisper an uncomfortable question: did he really exist? The records closest to Arthur's supposed time say nothing about a king, a magic sword, or a round table. The earliest of these texts, written by Gildas in the 6th century, is a bitter lament about the moral and political decay of post-Roman Britain. And even when describing battles and leaders, Gildas never mentions Arthur by name. Gildas, a monk with a fiery and moralistic literary style, criticizes the British rulers of his time with unusual ferocity. He mentions Ambrosius Aurelianus as the great defender of Britain against the Saxons, but Arthur? Not a word. This in itself raises a red flag. If Arthur was indeed the national hero that so many later texts describe, how can we explain his erasure in one of the sources closest to his time? The answer may lie in the nature of these chronicles. Gildas wrote to preach, to denounce, not to record history objectively. And in this context, perhaps Arthur did not fit into his moralizing narrative. Or more likely, Arthur's name had not yet been transformed into a symbol. He might have existed, but as a local minor leader, forgotten among the ruins of the Breton tribes. But Gildas's absence is later compensated by Nennius. In the 9th century, in the aforementioned history of the Britons, Arthur is prominently featured. He is described as a victorious warrior who led the British in 12 battles. The last of these, that of Mount Badon, is said to have been his greatest victory. It is here that Arthur takes on the contours of an almost mythical figure, with battles loaded with symbolism and even exaggeration. One of the battles, for example, is described as having been fought alone against 960 enemies. The exaggeration is obvious, but should not be read literally. These figures are probably intended to build an image of a legendary hero. Nennius, unlike Gildas, seems interested in creating a narrative of national identity. He weaves together oral tradition, folk tales, and elements of Christian mythology to form a mosaic that extols the bravery of the British. Arthur, in this context, becomes the symbol of resistance. But even here there are signs that the figure was already being shaped to serve political and religious purposes. In the following century, Bede the Venerable appeared, another essential name for those trying to understand post-Roman Britain. In his work Ecclesiastical History of the English Nation, Bede writes with a more chronological and didactic approach. He recounts the Saxon invasions, the decline of Roman institutions, and the slow Christianization of the islands. But Bede, like Gildas, is silent about Arthur. For him, the hero of the British resistance remains Ambrosius. This omission is not trivial. It shows that the figure of Arthur was not yet universally recognized as a British hero until the 8th century. This raises a fascinating hypothesis. Perhaps the myth of Arthur was born precisely in these gaps, between the silences and desires of an identity that was still being constructed. We now return to Mount Badon, one of the few events mentioned by both ancient sources and later chroniclers. Gildas mentions it without mentioning Arthur. Nennius elevates it as the scene of the great Arthurian victory. This point of conflict between accounts is one of the pillars of modern debate. Was Arthur the commander of this battle, or was his name later associated with it as a symbol of a victory that needed a face? There is also a theory that Arthur was not a proper name, but a military title. Some scholars suggest that Arthur could derive from Artorius, a Latin form that meant something like commander or war chief. This would explain why different leaders may have been confused or fused into a single legend, and it is precisely on this unstable terrain, made of silences, assumptions, and symbols, that the figure of Arthur begins to take shape. Not as a king, but as an idea. Not as a fact, but as a collective necessity. His absence in the most reliable records perhaps says more about the process of myth-making than about the existence of a man named Arthur. But if he really existed, and there are those who firmly believe that he did, where would the setting that shaped his legend be? What kind of world could produce such a hero? Perhaps the answer lies in the ashes of what was left of Britain after the fall of Rome. Imagine arriving at a coast where ancient Roman roads, now overgrown with weeds, cut through abandoned fields, and crumbling fortresses echo the silence of an empire that had faded. In the early 5th century, Britain was in chaos. Roman legions, marching off to defend Rome, leaving empty camps and a power vacuum where cold-blooded North Saxons and Picts saw a chance to conquer new lands, and local chieftains dreamed of building their own thrones of wood and fury. In this scenario of fragmentation, each tribe fought for its survival. The Britons, mixed races of Roman and Celtic traditions, strove to keep alive their languages, their customs, and above all, the memory of a civilization that seemed to be collapsing. The monetary economy collapsed. Barter once again dictated the value of everything. Imagine peasants exchanging cattle for cloth, grain for rustic tools, while in clearings lit by torches, elders negotiated alliances as if each pact were someone's last hope. Amidst this crossfire of invaders and internal rivalries, a leader emerged who could inspire loyalty and inspire hope. As Saxons set up coastal encampments, makeshift pacts emerged. Marriages between influential families, oaths sealed on Druid memorials, nightly meetings where torches flickered in the air while strategists drew maps of counterattacks. Witnesses to such gatherings would have been hard-pressed to believe that one man could reconcile the interests of local kings and calm the fears of stunned peasants. But it was precisely this spark that fanned the flame of a legendary hero. Later, chronicles tell of lightning ambushes against Saxon patrols, defenses of villages tucked away in the foothills of misty hills, and light cavalry attacks, reminiscent of Roman tactics adapted to British terrain. Each small victory was echoed in bardic songs. At an autumn festival, a saved standard fueled the word-of-mouth effect. At a Druidic ceremony, a whispered name inspired confidence for the next charge. Thus, in village after village, the Boer legend grew of those who paid vows at Christian and Druidic altars before leading their troops into battle. The thickets and woods of Britain served as both a hiding place for rebels and a secret route for messengers. Negotiations with Pictish militias, which sometimes allied to expel the Saxons, sometimes distanced themselves out of distrust, reflected the geopolitical game of a divided island. Narrow valleys allowed for perfect ambushes. Rivers became impassable. Barriers and ancient hills acted as natural watchtowers. For the locals, this man, the future Arthur, represented more than a military leader. He was a chance to reconnect with the Roman legacy of war engineering, now molded to the flexibility of an island land. Without a centralized power, reputation became a form of currency. It is said that in a clearing bathed in the silvery light of the moon, Breton princes gathered beneath an ancient oak tree to swear mutual loyalty. There was no majesty in carved stones. The embryonic Camelot was born there, amidst tree, trunks raised in a circle, torches flickering in the wind, and voices sealing pacts of collective defense. This image, recorded in later legends, carries echoes of real encounters, where community and strategy intertwined in pursuit of a common purpose. As Rome crumbled, its rulers more concerned with preserving their holdings on the mainland, Britannia, endured as a patchwork of small kingdoms. In villages, hot springs continued to gush, a reminder of the technical prowess of a bygone era. Local nobles adapted irrigation systems from Gaul, and wooden palisades stood like shadows of the Merovingian castles that would one day rise. It was a scene of contrasts, decadence and innovation, official neglect and popular ingenuity. In this melting pot, each triumph was immortalized on wooden panels and chanted in songs that spread across distant villages. The legend was forged as crucial decisions defined the fate of a people. to resist in isolation, or to unite under a single flag. This tension between local independence and collective unity foreshadowed decisive conflicts that would shape borders and reputations in the centuries to come. If this journey through 5th century Britain makes your heart beat with curiosity, don't forget to subscribe, like and share with other lovers of stories that defy time. Imagine the dawn of a new era. Roman roads, once the pulsing veins of the empire, became silent corridors, their worn cobblestones a testament to the retreat of the legions. At the dawn of the 5th century, Roman magistrates and officials set out to defend Rome, leaving behind them tottering administrations and fortresses that were now nothing more than echoes of a fading power. Into this void, British warlords, once subservient to a distant ruler, raised their own banners. Former legionaries, accustomed to Roman rigor, fought bitterly against Celtic families, each claiming territory that the empire had only recently held together. Meanwhile, Saxons took advantage of occasional landings to establish settlements on the east coast. Picts advanced across the northern plains, and Scots crossed the Irish Channel on predatory expeditions. Each ethnic group forged alliances of convenience, arranged marriages, sealed understandings that lasted only a winter, and Druidic oaths were broken by ambition or fear. The local king controlled only his faithful companies of warriors, and with each season the geography redrawn boundaries, flooded marshes in autumn, dense woods in winter, ideal terrain for lightning ambushes. With the monetary economy in ruins, bartering re-emerged as the norm. Sheep's wool, small horses, and utilitarian pottery became valuable currencies. Acrobats who brought salt to cure meats traded it for iron tools, while local artisans fused techniques imported from the Dalmatians to produce lighter blades. In villages near still active Roman baths, narrow irrigation canals were converted into fish ponds, providing sustenance in lean months. On a board of uncertainties like this, an extraordinary leader emerged. It was not enough to control troops. It was necessary to win hearts. On the banks of sacred lakes or under ancient oak trees, regional chiefs met in collective courts, expressing needs and offering contingents. It was said that this warrior, even when wounded, would raise his cup of mead with a smile, drinking alongside his men before leading them into battle, a gesture that forged his reputation as an indestructible protector. Inspired by the swift, light cavalry units that once patrolled the Roman frontiers, he adopted tactics of surprise, nighttime ambushes in river valleys, morning fogs that concealed his flanks, and sharp lookout networks on nearby hills. Every victory, no matter how small, reverberated in distant villages. Bards sang of Saxon patrols that were cut off or improvised defenses that saved entire settlements, rebuilding the spirit of Roman military engineering on fragmented soil. These small triumphs sowed the seeds of the idea of a unified council. In hidden clearings between woods and swamps, emissaries replaced swords with parchment. Torches flickered above unsheathed blades as leaders swore loyalty to each other, not in stone halls, but beneath the canopy of ancient trees. It was there, on that sacred and improvised ground, that the first glimpse of Camelot was born. Not a resplendent castle, but a network of alliances forged in the common purpose of protecting Britannia. Imagine a silent room, lit only by a flickering lamp over stacks of yellowed manuscripts and hand-scrawled maps. There, Phillips and Keatman, a curious journalist and a self-taught archaeologist with a passion for war tactics, were gathered to unravel the riddle of Arthur. They were not in search of tourist Camelot, but of a forgotten manuscript, where, in the margin of the Historia Brittonum, someone had scrawled, "Hic vocatur Arthur." This is where they call him Arthur. That note in worn Latin lit the spark that would set the entire investigation in motion. Meanwhile, in the silent libraries of France, they discovered enigmatic references by Chrétien de Troyes, a certain Oculus, perhaps a royal fortress, in references to a Dux Britannorum who was never named Arthur. If not even Lancelot's verses gave him his name, who was behind the myth? Soon the first candidates emerged. Riothamus, A king who had fought alongside Aetius at Tours seemed promising, until Visigothic chronologies and coins from Braga placed him 2 decades before Baden. Then the focus turned to Lucius Artorius Castus, a Roman commander in the Adriatic. Artorius was the right name, but excavations at Podstrana showed that he died far from the British Isles, with no Celtic descendants to support the legend. Each rejected hypothesis refined their method. Phillips and Keatman adopted a multidisciplinary compass. They excavated tombs for DNA, mapped inscriptions on high crosses and stelae, noted variant names in villages, from Card Artur to Ardur, and cross-referenced genealogies, as far as the parchment would allow. At a monastery in St. Dogmael's, the Shock, a charred parchment listed princes of Reged, and among them was Ugain, Gaelic for young warrior. Owain Ddantgwyn stepped from the shadows of the lineages to center stage. From humble baptisms to land transactions to modest tombs, this prince's tracks followed the trails of soldiers and raiders alike. Ambrosius Aurelianus, Gildas's Roman hero, so powerful in narrative, fell from his podium when confronted with letters from Sulpicius Severus and accounts from Camelot. He had operated in the south, far from the 12 battles attributed to Arthur. With no imperial ancestors to defend, the true protagonist was born in the heart of Britain. Owain Ddantgwyn, Prince of Reged, controlled the passes between the marshes and the mountains, forged alliances with the clans of Strathclyde, and sent out commanders whose exploits echoed in the chronicles of Nennius. But the great discovery is not just naming a name. It is understanding the reason for every line on parchment, every fragment of pottery, every legend whispered in Gothic chapels. In the end, the great investigation reveals a truth more vivid than any epic. Arthur was not a fabled being, but a real man forged by tribal alliances and internal conflicts. The almost imperceptible tremor of old pages being turned in a room where silence weighs more than air. In the flickering light of a lamp, Phillips, the journalist driven by curiosity, and Keatman, the archaeologist who dreams of unearthing secrets, line up stacks of parchment and scribbled maps. There are no tourists, no swords stuck in stones. It all starts here, with the hunt for a name that has been whispered for centuries. The starting point is almost poetic, a faded footnote in a medieval copy of the Historia Brittonum, scrawled in uncertain Latin, Hic vocatur Arthur. This is where they call Arthur. This small fragment, forgotten in the margin of a worn page, lit a spark that would span generations of legend. Meanwhile, in the silent libraries of France, clues are discovered in manuscripts by Chrétien de Troyes, references to a Dux Britannorum, and mentions of an enigmatic fortress called an Oculus, hints of a real kingdom, hidden beneath veils of fantasy. The first suspects emerge as historical shadows: Riothamus, the British king who fought alongside Aetius at Tours, but whose battles predate Baden; Artorius Castus, Roman commander in the Adriatic, brilliant in barbarian wars, but buried far from Britain; Ambrosius Aurelianus, hero of Gildas, lord of southern Britain, too far removed from the 12 battles of Nennius. Each name discarded was not a failure, but a step towards the true protagonist. The investigation then takes on epic proportions. Monastic manuscripts are copied by candlelight, revealing repeated records of a certain Owain Map Ddantgwyn. In excavations in North Wales, Ogham inscriptions emerge from broken gravestones. Speaking of a prince of the Britons, medieval maps, battle chronicles, and genealogies intertwine, tracing a strategic corridor from Cumbria to the Usk Valley. And then, the final moment. Verses of bards carved on ceramic fragments, radiocarbon dated. Bones and traces of diplomatic pacts converge on a single name: Owain Ddantgwyn. Owain was not just a character in a poem. He emerged as a prince of Reged, organizer of swift armies, maker of pacts in sacred glades, weaver of networks of informants that stretched across misty woods and stormy rivers. A leader capable of uniting fragmented tribes, with no throne, of stone but an embryonic Camelot forged in the strength of alliance. It is this journey, from the dust of manuscripts to the remains of pottery at archaeological sites, that reveals how Owain Ddantgwyn rewrote the destiny of post-Roman Britain and perhaps lit the spark of the myth we know as King Arthur. Imagine a prince emerging from the mists of northwestern Britain. Owain Ddantgwyn, Gaelic for young warrior of Mandan. Not a Roman commander, but a child of the Celtic mists and the remnants of military discipline left by the legionaries. Born around 480 AD, in lands we now call Cumberland, he was heir to the powerful dynasty of Reged, where the name Ddantgwyn came from his father, Danwyn. Think of Bavarian monks at Glastonbury writing Owain map Danvin in a list of kings, and parchments from St. Bees Priory and Jesus College tracing their lineage back to ancient Celtic kings. Phillips and Keatman, with the flair of detectives, cross-reference these chronicles with DNA analysis of bones from Reged. A laboratory in Cardiff confirmed genetic traces linking him to the people of northwest Wales. Owain was no outsider. He was a Breton through and through, pure-blooded. Now look at the map. Routes connecting natural forts in the Eden Valley, the cliffs of Penrith and the hills of High Cup. At Clifton Dykes and Brougham Castle, excavations dating from AD 490–520 have unearthed late iron spears, horseshoe nails, and local pottery, evidence of armorers' workshops and trade routes dominated by a strong ruler. Owain maintained supplies and weaponry of a superior quality to that of the invading Saxons. In Welsh oral chronicles, he is celebrated as a master of light cavalry, a tactic reminiscent of Roman centurions, but adapted to British terrain. The Brudi Tywysogion chronicles his lightning skirmishes, night raids, dawn retreats, regrouping in nearby woods, tactics that disoriented heavy armies trapped in rigid formations. And it wasn't just a war of blades. Owain wove alliances. Picts, north of Hadrian's Wall, and Scottish clans came to Reged to trade horses for supplies. Fragmentary correspondence in monastery archives speak of tribute sendings, signs of the early diplomacy that made Owain an influential player on the British scene. The most enigmatic find? The Talisman of Reged, an amber pendant, inlaid with silver, discovered in a court tomb. Anglo-Saxon runic inscriptions, reinterpreted by local craftsmen, suggest a non-aggression pact between distinct peoples, evidence that Owain reconciled military force and political mediation. But all was not glory. Genealogies record family feuds, succession disputes that undermined his power in his final years. His death, between 540 and 545 AD, coincides with mentions in the Annales Cambriae of the Battle of Camlan, possibly on the plains of the river Ure in Yorkshire, where bronze weapons emerged in 1998. If Arthur was Owain, it makes sense that Nennius credits him with 12 battles across Britain. Each victory, passed down through the generations, transformed the prince into Arturus, the name monks Latinized to record his exploits. The legend grew into epic tales, but at its root was a leader skilled in guerrilla warfare and strategic alliances. And when we look at medieval maps, we see Dinnawain and Llanowin marking hills and villages, perpetuating their memory. Breton poems at the court of Carmel, even without mentioning Arthur, sung of Owain map Danvin, ambushes, dramatic escapes, packs by torchlight. It was oral tradition paving the way for the Arthurian myth that Geoffrey and Chrétien would immortalize. Owain Ddantgwyn was not just a name forgotten in parchment. He was the architect of a Breton Renaissance, a prince who forged the destiny of his people and lit the flame that came to be called King Arthur. An army broken into living cells, each commanded by a trusted leader, loyal relatives or battle-hardened veterans. These small groups were given a single direction: campaign objectives, areas of operation, priority targets. After that, they were free to decide the best time and place to attack. Without returning to Owain for every adjustment, they acted with the autonomy of generals, reacting in seconds to enemy ambushes. It was a mission-based command 5 centuries ahead of its time. Instead of a fixed camp, Owain's troops were constantly on the move, setting up and taking down shelters every 5 days. During this cycle, they practiced mock battles in woods and valleys, narrow gorges between cliffs, muddy bogs, slinging exercises in the shade, hitting targets without looking directly at the sun, and spear maneuvers in muddy terrain prepared each warrior for the harsh British climate. Intelligence came from the land itself. Fishermen, woodcutters, and hunters acted as spies, knowing shortcuts through treacherous marshes and places where the snow melted first. On at least 3 occasions, Owain diverted entire Saxon columns into quicksand bogs and icy rapids, turning the terrain into his most deadly weapon. And when enemy walls rose, he arranged for lightweight, modular siege devices, collapsible ladders, folding ramps, hand-carried battering rams. At sites like Brougham Castle, archaeologists have found bronze bolts and hinged hooks, fragments of machines that, assembled in less than an hour, could break down palisades as efficiently as great Roman towers, but without requiring days of preparation. Owain spared no psychological warfare tricks. Messengers pretending to have deserted escaped his lines, spreading rumors among the Saxons. If even our men desert, why fight? At the same time, bards infused the troops with verses that narrated how Owain appeared, like smoke in the darkness, forging an aura of invincibility that rendered fear even before the blades crossed. The sea also belonged to him. In alliance with local fishermen, he converted rowing boats into naval squadrons, attacking Saxon landings in fjords and bays, and cutting off enemy supplies in the rear. This novel combination of land and naval tactics was reminiscent of Roman river patrols now adapted to light vessels. Finally, it maintained green corridors for resupply. Clearings scattered throughout the Vale of Eden served as mobile workshops, where itinerant blacksmiths sharpened blades, repaired armor, and smelted ironwork. Remnants of portable anvils and coals attest that troops could remain months away from Reged, conducting lightning campaigns or prolonged sieges without ever running out of equipment. This network of cells, local intelligence, light weapons, psychological warfare, naval tactics, and advanced logistics converged on a single purpose: to transform an improvised army into a cohesive power, the real basis of the myth that would later be called King Arthur. Camelot has always been portrayed as the beating heart of a united Britain, the hall where kings made oaths, knights celebrated victories, and plans were made for the fate of the entire island. But if the real Arthur was Owain Ddantgwyn, where would this legendary bastion be? Archaeologists and ancient map enthusiasts point to several promising ruins, with Caerleon and Viraconium leading the charge, while other forgotten relics also offer fascinating clues. In South Wales, stone walls and the remains of an amphitheater reveal a Roman military camp, I Canabaunum, that was active from the 2nd to the 5th century. Excavations since the 19th century have revealed rectangular foundations and a system of reinforced walls, creating an infrastructure that Owain could have used as a base. Boats would have brought supplies and iron spears down the River Usk, while strategists adjusted plans in inner plazas, and messengers scurried through stone corridors to summon Picts and Britons from overseas. The fusion of Roman engineering and island urgency, wood, stone, and tactics, makes Caerleon a formidable candidate for Proto-Camelot. To the east rises Wroxeter, the largest Roman settlement in Britain, with 350 acres of walled land, paved streets, and ancient aqueducts. In the late 4th century, some of the population migrated to rural fortresses, but a ceremonial building discovered in 2018 near the southern perimeter suggests a forum was reconfigured into a meeting hall. Imagine tribal chiefs gathered on mosaics revived with gold cloth, toasting mead to the sound of pacts of mutual defense, a makeshift council throne worthy of the early Round Table. At Burgh Castle in eastern England, a Roman fort surrounded by floodplains offered natural defense. Surrounding marshes and high dunes made invaders easy prey. Submerged stake traps lie in the marshland, signaling ideal environmental defenses for a visionary leader. At South Cadbury Hill, earthen and mud walls dating back to the 5th century emerge from beneath the ground. Post-Roman pottery and burnt manuscript fragments attest to intermittent occupation. Local legends and the proximity to the mythical Vale of Avalon reinforce the hypothesis that a prototype of Camelot flourished there. Isolated from the Saxons to the north, protected from Celtic pirates to the west, but connected to folkloric narratives of a sacred kingdom. Tintagel, while celebrating the legend of Guinevere, also has a strong sense of symbolism. Stone towers perched on a rocky headland and an early medieval chapel. If Owain had wanted to cement Christian alliances, this dramatic setting would have spoken to both Roman Christian and pagan Celtic cultures, serving as an architectural symbol for a king who united cultures. While the stones silently stand guard, for millennia, historians weave together Roman roads that reappear on medieval maps. Toponyms such as Din Gwart, leader's fortress, and Celtic inscriptions on scattered stelae. Each fragment forms a mosaic of possibilities. But one certainty remains. Camelot, more than a place, was a state of mind. The point of convergence between technology, diplomacy, and myth that defined the legend of Arthur. Imagine Caerleon, a new light. Ground-penetrating radar scans reveal the foundations of timber structures that once lay hidden beneath the rubble of the Roman fort. Light outbuildings, perhaps officers' pavilions, appear in GPR images, while LiDAR reveals artificial terraces along the Usk, raised platforms where noble families, perhaps even Owain's court, found refuge in times of flood. It is a makeshift, but functional palace designed to escape seasonal flooding. In Viraconium, the banquet also has its archaeological trail. Ceramic fragments subjected to carbon and nitrogen isotope analyses reveal flavors from afar, remains of wine imported from southern Gaul in jars from the ceremonial hall suggest that there were toasts to alliances forged in mutual trust. Impressions of wicker baskets on local ceramics speak of continuous artisanal production, perhaps financed by the tributes collected at these meetings. The primitive round table, where goods and promises of defense were exchanged, connecting. These poles, secondary roads, formed a sacred axis between Caerleon and Viraconium. Toponymic markers with Din, fortress, and Lan, church site, Dunmow, Lanarth, the Welsh field of Arthur, marked corridors cleared by royal servants. Messengers and diplomatic caravans glided along these green corridors, bringing orders and supplies at crucial times. At Berg Castle, terrain is a weapon. Seismic surveys and sediment profiles trace layers of intact peat, forming living bogs that, fishermen have reported since the 10th century, swallow horses in quicksand traps. What heavy army would dare advance, knowing that treacherous ground awaited them even before the walls? South Cadbury Hill, meanwhile, holds secrets beneath the ground. Magnetic resonance imaging points to a rectangular structure, a 6th century chapel, whose red and blue plaster fragments indicate interfaith decoration, with Christian and Druid symbols. It was a space where prayer and rites came together, reflecting Owain's vision of blending faith and tradition to forge unity. At Tintagel, thermoluminescence on ceramic bricks corrects dates and aligns the chapel with Owain's reign. It now makes sense that he chose this rocky headland as a symbolic refuge and a stage for Christian diplomacy, strengthening ties with the church in a dramatic setting between sea and cliffs. And it doesn't stop there. Pollen analysis shows olive and grapevine plantings between 480 and 540 AD, Mediterranean customs transplanted to British microclimates. Royal vineyards produced food for Camelot, reinforcing Owain as a provider and symbol of prosperity. Together, these luminaries of modern archaeology paint a picture of Camelot not as a single castle, but as a constellation of interconnected fortresses, ceremonial spaces, economic routes, and religious centers. It was a kingdom in the making, woven by Owain Ddantgwyn from stone, earth, and myth, a state of mind that echoes through the centuries. In the damp silence of ruined chapels and beneath ancient hills lie traces that may confirm, or challenge, the existence of Arthur as a historical figure. Archaeologists and epigraphers have followed dusty trails, opening tombs in search of bones, funerary objects, and enigmatic inscriptions. At Penrith, in the heart of Reged, a 2002 excavation uncovered a mass grave, 3 adults laid side by side, flanked by pottery, iron blades, and a bronze chalice engraved with runes. The incomplete inscriptions mention dux and fideli, leader and loyal, words that whisper authority. Isotope tests of bone by Durham University have shown diets rich in game meat, a luxury reserved for the nobility. Could this be the tomb of Owain Ddantgwyn and his entourage? Moving down into Cornwall, St. Enodoc's Chapel displays a limestone monument with the late Latin inscription, Hic situs est Arturus Miles. Here lies Arthur the warrior. Heated debate. Did local monks retouch the stone in the Middle Ages to attract devotees, or do the style of the letters and the type of limestone point to the 6th century? If genuine, this is one of the rare direct testimonies of the name Arthur outside of manuscripts. On South Cadbury Hill, the so-called Cadbury inscription decorates a tall cross with Celtic spirals and Christian crosses, a relic of religious conflicts. Epigraphers at the Royal Archaeological Institute have identified references to a tribe of the Brigantes and a Presil, governor, but some of the relief has been intentionally scraped away, perhaps to erase memories of dynastic rivals. As far north as Galloway, Irish stelae dating from AD 510-550 depict battle scenes in Ogham, praising Guibertus, Fidus Dux Britonum, Guibert, faithful leader of the Britons. Was he Owain's lieutenant, or a forgotten rival? These stelae rekindle the debate over alliances and internal feuds. Another striking scene emerges in the Avon Valley. A monolithic sandstone sarcophagus, inside which lay an unsheathed sword, its Adriatic steel blade inscribed with Regis Arma, weapon of a king. Tallographic analysis in Sheffield detected a high-hardness alloy, a technique adapted locally by Roman masters. This sword offering would symbolize power and legitimacy, a tribute that crossed seas to adorn the tomb of a sovereign. In all these cases, contradictions are obvious, possibly retouched inscriptions, tombs that mix elite and clergy, objects of pagan and Christian styles coexisting side by side. But instead of frustrating the historian, these layers of memory pique his curiosity. Repurposed carvings, displaced tombstones, ancestral bones gathered around a central figure. Each community seems to have claimed a piece of the myth, forging Arthur, or Owain, as a shared hero in its own way. And it is among these silent tombs and enigmatic inscriptions that the next chapter takes shape. Deciphering the final clues before revealing the powerful truth that unites myth and history. What if Arthur was never the monarch of tales, seated on a throne of stone and gold, but rather Owain Ddantgwyn, a prince of Reged who rose from the ashes of a crumbling empire? Imagine his name ringing in Gaelic, Latin, and Old Brythonic, rippling across misty glens, misty hills, and silent chapels, growing ever more heroic in its glow with each generation. Owain was a man of flesh and blood, shaped by nighttime ambushes, inspired by the Roman legions and strengthened by tribal alliances, subject to family betrayals, succession disputes, and the challenges of feeding an ever-moving army. He held councils not in palatial halls, but in sacred glades where torches cast shadows over Christian pacts and Druid rites. This duality, between faith and tradition, rough wood and monumental stone, solid ground and raging rivers, reveals the fragile yet powerful essence that medieval myth erases. Look at the inscriptions scratched into chapel walls, the amber talismans hidden in remote tombs, the trenches hidden in treacherous marshes. Every fragment of pottery, every runic inscription, every name engraved on ancient maps is a piece of real history that, mixed with the breath of fantasy, created the legendary King Arthur. Myths are bridges that connect generations, shortcuts that carry values from one era to the next. History needs heroes, and myth needs a name. Owain Ddantgwyn gives us that name, a thread that connects us to communities in crisis, offering a beacon of hope. But it is up to us, the curious and the historians, to separate the gold of legend from the ashes of tradition. If this video has sparked your curiosity, subscribe, like and share it with those who value the truth buried under layers of centuries. In this way, you keep the flame of investigation alive and drive discoveries that continue to unravel the secrets of a real hero among the shadows of myth.